My parents dropped me off at a rest stop outside Albuquerque. I spent that night hiding under a picnic table. My name is Ethan. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and from the outside, our family looked like a postcard. Nice neighborhood, good schools, 2 cars in the driveway. My dad was a civil engineer. My mom managed a chain of dental offices. My older sister Chloe was 2 years ahead of me. Honor roll, swim team, student council, the golden child. I was not the golden child. I didn't know it then, but I had dyslexia and anxiety. All I knew was that reading made my head feel like static, and no matter how hard I tried, I was always one step behind. My dad would quiz me on vocabulary words, and when I got them wrong, he'd say, "Chloe never had this problem." My mom scheduled meetings with my teachers not to help me, but to explain to them why I was an embarrassment. By 13, I'd given up trying to impress them. By 14, I'd started getting in minor trouble at school, skipping class, mouthing off to a teacher once. Nothing serious, but to my parents, I was a catastrophe. The summer before 9th grade, we drove out to Sedona for a long weekend. On the way home, my dad pulled into a rest stop off the interstate. My mom told me to get out and stretch my legs, so I did. While I was at the vending machine, my dad appeared behind me and set my backpack down on the concrete. "Your mother and I think you need a reality check," he said. "You've made this family miserable. There's $40 in there. Figure it out." He turned and walked back to the car. My mom didn't look at me. The car pulled back onto the road. I stood at that vending machine for a long time. I slept behind a dumpster that night, too afraid to approach strangers. The next morning, a highway patrol officer found me sitting on a curb and brought me in. When I told him what happened, he looked like he wanted to put his fist through a wall. My parents were contacted. They said I'd thrown a fit and wandered off on my own. The officer didn't believe them, but proving abandonment is harder than it sounds. What saved me was my school counselor, a man named Gerald, who had always quietly advocated for me. He got involved fast, pushed for a formal evaluation, and within weeks I had a diagnosis and a caseworker. My parents, cornered and apparently relieved, signed over guardianship to my maternal aunt in Colorado, who I'd met maybe 4 times. Aunt Renee was blunt and not particularly warm, but she was fair. She got me tutors. She came to my IEP meetings. She showed up. I graduated, went to Colorado State, got a degree in communications, married my college girlfriend Sarah. I built a life that had nothing to do with Phoenix. Then the letter came. Not an invitation, a handwritten letter from Chloe. She said she'd been searching for me for 2 years. She told me she'd been in the back seat that day, that she had screamed at my parents to turn around. She said our dad slapped the seat and told her to be quiet. She was 16 and terrified, and she had never forgiven herself. She also told me something I didn't expect. She'd recorded a conversation recently where my mother casually said that leaving me there had been the right call. Chloe had already sent the recording to a family attorney and to the extended family, including my grandparents, who apparently had no idea any of this had ever happened. I called her that night. We talked for 3 hours. She cried. I didn't. Not on the phone. I did later, sitting in my car in the garage after we hung up while Sarah waited inside. Here's where things stand now. My parents are being quietly cut off by the extended family one by one. My grandfather, a man I always respected, called me directly and told me he was sorry he hadn't known. That phone call undid something in me I didn't realize was still knotted up. Chloe and I are meeting in person next month. I don't know what that looks like yet, but for the first time in 18 years, I feel like the story isn't finished. The meeting with Chloe happened in a small diner halfway between Denver and Phoenix. I got there 20 minutes early. I sat in a booth near the back, my hands shoved deep into my pockets because they wouldn't stop shaking. Every time the bell above the door chimed, my stomach did a slow, painful somersault. Then she walked in. She looked like our mother. That was the first thing that hit me. The same sharp cheekbones, the same calculated way she scanned the room. But when her eyes met mine, the expression was entirely different. It wasn't cold, it was shattered. She sat down across from me. For a solid minute, neither of us said a word. The waitress came by, filled 2 mugs with coffee, and disappeared. "You have a beard," Chloe said, her voice cracking. "I'm 32, Chloe. Things happen." She reached across the table, hovering her hand near mine like she was afraid I'd vanish if she touched me. "I looked for you. For years, Ethan. I asked them every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. They told me you'd changed your name, that you told the state you never wanted to see us again. They told me you hated me. I didn't hate you," I said, and I meant it. "I just forgot you existed for a while. I had to. It was the only way to get through the tutoring sessions and the nights where I still woke up thinking I was under that picnic table." She pulled a thick envelope out of her bag. "I'm not just here to say sorry. I'm here to finish what I started." Inside were documents, financial records. It turns out our grandfather, the one who called me, had set up trust funds for both of us when we were toddlers. My parents had been the custodians. When they dumped me, they didn't just abandon a child. They began systematically draining my trust to pay for Chloe's private university and their own lifestyle upgrades. They'd filed fraudulent paperwork claiming I was unreachable or incapacitated. "They stole from you, Ethan," Chloe said. "Almost $200,000 over 15 years. I stared at the numbers. They didn't feel real. Money was never the point, but the betrayal had layers I hadn't even imagined. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to profit from my absence." "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want them to see me," I said. 3 weeks later, I drove back to Phoenix. I hadn't seen the house in nearly 2 decades. The desert heat felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs. I parked at the end of the cul-de-sac and walked up the driveway. The silver Lexus was gone, replaced by a newer model. The lawn was still perfect. I didn't knock. Chloe had given me her key. I walked into the kitchen. My mother was at the island, scrolling through a tablet. My father was in the living room, reading a paper. It was so normal it made me nauseous. "Who's there?" my mother asked, not looking up. "Chloe, did you forget?" She stopped. She looked at me. It took her 5 seconds to realize who I was. Her face didn't go soft with relief. It didn't crumple with guilt. It went pale with fear. "Ethan?" my father said, standing up from the couch. He looked older, thinner, but the arrogance was still there in the set of his jaw. "What are you doing in this house?" "I'm checking in on my investment," I said. I tossed the folder Chloe had given me onto the granite island. It slid across the surface and hit my mother's coffee mug with a sharp Times clink. "We have a lot to talk about," I said, my voice steady in a way I didn't think possible. "The abandonment, the fraud, the theft. My lawyer is already in touch with the DA's office in Albuquerque regarding the interstate abandonment, and a civil suit is being filed tomorrow morning here in Maricopa County." My mother started to stammer. "We did it for you, Ethan. You were out of control. We needed to give you a lesson in—" "A lesson?" I cut her off. The sound of my own voice startled me. It was deep, adult, and utterly devoid of the fear I'd carried since I was 14. "You left a child with a learning disability at a truck stop with $40. You didn't give me a lesson. You gave me a death sentence. It just didn't stick." My father moved toward me. "Get out of my house." "Actually," I said, leaning back against the doorframe, "Chloe and I talked to Grandpa. He's the one who actually owns the deed to this place through the family trust. And since he found out what you did, he's decided to change the property management. You have 30 days to vacate." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I didn't wait for them to cry. I didn't wait for an apology that would have been a lie anyway. I turned around and walked out. Chloe Chloe was waiting in her car at the curb. I got in, and we sat there for a moment, watching the house that had once been my prison. How do you feel? She asked. I looked at my hands. They were perfectly still. I feel like I finally got up from the table, I said. We drove away, leaving that postcard life behind us for good. I went back to Colorado, back to Sarah, back to a world where words are sometimes hard to read, but the people around me are easy to trust. My parents lost their house, their reputation, and their children. I didn't get 18 years back, but I got the one thing they tried to take from me at that vending machine. The legal battle that followed wasn't the dramatic courtroom scene you see on TV. It was a slow, agonizing grind of depositions, bank statements, and cold, hard reality. My parents tried to fight it at first. They hired a high-priced lawyer who tried to paint me as a troubled youth who had effectively emancipated himself. It didn't work. Not when Chloe produced the recordings. Not when the highway patrol officer from 18 years ago now, a captain, testified via video link about the terrified boy he'd found shivering on a curb. 6 months after I walked out of their kitchen, they settled. They didn't have a choice. To avoid criminal charges for the trust fund fraud, they signed over what was left of their retirement accounts and the equity from the sale of the house. It wasn't the full $200,000, but it was enough to make them feel the sting of the poverty they'd once mocked me with. Chloe moved to Denver. She couldn't stay in Phoenix anymore. The air there tasted too much like secrets. She took a job at a nonprofit that works with foster kids. I think it's her way of balancing the scales. We see each other every other weekend now. It's still a bit awkward. There are gaps in our shared history that we'll never truly bridge. She'll talk about a high school prom I wasn't there to see her off to, and I'll talk about a graduation she didn't know happened, but we're trying. The biggest shift, though, happened last month. I was at home in Colorado, helping Sarah plant a garden in our backyard. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the grass. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was an unknown number from the 602 area code. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Ethan? It was my mother. Her voice sounded thin, brittle, like dry parchment. What do you want? I asked. I didn't say it with anger. I said it with the flat exhaustion of a man who had finally run out of things to give. We're in an apartment in Mesa, she said. Your father, he's not doing well. His heart, the stress of the move, the legal fees. He wants to see you. Just once. I looked over at Sarah. She was covered in dirt, laughing as she tried to get our golden retriever to stop digging up the marigolds. She looked happy. She looked safe. No, I said. Ethan, please. We're your parents. After everything, blood has to mean. Blood meant nothing at that rest stop. I interrupted. It meant nothing when you cashed those checks from my grandfather. You didn't want a son then. You wanted a ghost. Well, congratulations. You got one. You're being cruel, she whispered. No, I said, watching Sarah wave at me from across the yard. I'm being honest. You told me to figure it out 18 years ago. I did. I figured out that I don't need you. I figured out that a family isn't something you're born into. It's something you earn the right to keep, and you lost that right a long time ago. I hung up. I didn't block the number. I didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was light. It was the sound of a debt finally being paid in full. I walked down the porch steps and knelt in the dirt next to my wife. Everything okay? She asked, wiping a smudge of soil off her forehead. Yeah, I said, picking up a trowel. Everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. I still have bad days. I still struggle with certain documents, and sometimes, when I'm in a crowded place, I get a flash of that old anxiety, a fear that I'm about to be left behind. But then I feel the weight of my house keys in my pocket. I look at the woman who loves me for exactly who I am. I think of my sister, just a 2-hour drive away. The boy under the picnic table is gone. He didn't just survive. He built a fortress out of the stones they threw at him. And for the first time in my life, when I look at the road ahead, I'm not looking for a way back. I'm just looking forward. The finality of that phone call shifted something in the atmosphere of my daily life. For weeks, I expected another attempt, a letter, a different number, maybe even a desperate knock on the door, but it never came. My parents had finally realized that the bridge wasn't just burned. The island it led to had drifted out of their reach entirely. Chloe and I decided to take a trip together. We didn't go to a resort or a big city. We drove back into the desert, but this time, we went north, toward the mountains. We ended up in a small town in New Mexico, not far from where it all happened. It was a test, I think, a way to see if the geography still held power over me. We sat on the porch of a small cabin, watching the stars come out. The desert sky is different than the one in Colorado. It's wider, more indifferent. I found something, Chloe said, pulling a small, battered object from her pocket. She handed it to me. It was a plastic toy soldier, the green kind you buy in bulk at a dollar store. One of the arms was melted, and the base was chipped. I kept it, she said. You dropped it in the driveway the morning we left for Sedona. I went to give it back to you, but Mom told me to get in the car. I hid it in my jewelry box for 18 years. Every time I looked at it, I felt sick, but I couldn't throw it away. I held the tiny piece of plastic in my palm. I remembered that soldier. I used to carry a whole squad of them in my pockets, like a private security detail. It was a relic from a version of me that had been erased. You can let it go now, I said. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. Can I? Yeah, we both can. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. I didn't make a big speech. I just flicked the soldier out into the dark brush. I heard it click against a stone, and then silence. It felt right. Let the desert have it. It had already taken enough from us. It could have that too. A month later, Grandpa passed away. It wasn't unexpected, but it hit me harder than I thought it would. He was the only link left to a past that wasn't poisoned. At the funeral, I saw them. My parents were standing by the gates of the cemetery. They didn't come to the service. They knew they weren't welcome. They stood there like two strangers watching a parade, looking small and gray in the Arizona sun. My father was in a wheelchair now, his face gaunt. My mother held his hand, looking around as if she expected someone to come over and invite them in. Nobody did. The extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins they had lied to for decades, moved in a tight circle around Chloe and me. It was a wall of backs. As we walked toward the cars after the burial, I had to pass them. Chloe gripped my arm, her knuckles white. I felt that old spark of anxiety in my chest, the static in my brain starting to hum. But as I got closer, the feeling changed. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was a profound, hollow pity. They looked like people who had spent their whole lives building a house of cards and were now surprised that the wind had blown it down. My mother stepped forward, her mouth opening to speak. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just looked straight ahead, focusing on the shimmer of heat on the pavement. I felt her gaze linger on me, searching for the boy who used to beg for her approval. She didn't find him. When I got back to Colorado, Sarah was waiting at the airport with a sign that said, "Welcome home, homeowner." We'd officially closed on a new property the week before, a small historic building in town that I wanted to turn into a learning center for kids with dyslexia. I was using the settlement money to fund it. I wanted to create a place where static in the head was treated like a puzzle to be solved, not a reason to be discarded. How was it? Sarah asked as we walked to the car. It was quiet, I said, and it's over. Really over. That night, I sat in my home office. I looked at the floor plans for the center. For the first time, the lines and words didn't look like an impossible maze. They looked like a map. I thought about that $40 in the backpack. I thought about the cold metal of the vending machine and the smell of the dumpster behind the rest stop. Those things are part of of me, but they don't define me anymore. They're just the beginning of a story that turned out much better than the authors intended. I picked up a pen and made a note on the margin of the blueprints. Front entrance. No locks on the inside. Everyone is allowed to leave, but everyone is always welcome to stay. I'm Ethan. I'm a husband, a brother, and a business owner. I'm a man who learned to read the world on his own terms. And as I turned off the light and went to join my wife, I realized that the best revenge isn't seeing them lose. It's realizing you no longer care if they win. I'm finally home. And this time, nobody's driving away. The renovation of the learning center took 6 months. I was there every day, watching the walls get stripped back to the studs and rebuilt. It felt symbolic, the tearing down of something old and broken to make room for something that actually served a purpose. I insisted on big, open windows. I wanted the kids to see the world outside and know they were still a part of it, even when they were inside struggling with a page of text. The center opened on a Tuesday in September. We called it the bridge. Chloe came up for the ribbon cutting. She stood in the back, leaning against the doorframe of the main classroom, watching as the first group of kids trickled in. One little boy, maybe 7 or 8, was clinging to his mother's leg, his eyes wide with that specific brand of terror I knew all too well. It's the look of a child who thinks he's broken because he can't do what everyone else finds easy. I knelt down in front of him. "Hey," I said, "you see that sign over there?" I pointed to a poster on the wall with jumbled letters that slowly formed the word times strength. I couldn't read that when I was your age. It looked like a bunch of spiders dancing on the wall. The boy looked at me, his grip on his mom's jeans loosening just a fraction. "What did you do?" "I learned how to lead the dance," I told him, "and I'm going to show you how too." He didn't smile, not yet, but he let go of his mom and walked toward a table with a bowl of Lego bricks. It was a start. Later that evening, after the last family had left, Chloe and I sat on the floor of the empty lobby. The smell of fresh paint and new carpet was thick in the air. "You're good at this, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing slightly off the high ceilings. "I had a lot of practice being the person who needed this place," I replied. She was quiet for a moment, tracing the pattern of the carpet with her finger. "I got an email today from an attorney in Phoenix. Dad passed away this morning. The air in the room didn't change. The sun didn't stop setting. I felt a slight tightening in my chest, a phantom echo of the boy I used to be, but it passed quickly. It was like hearing about a character in a book I'd read a long time ago. A tragedy, sure, but not times my times tragedy anymore. Are you going?" I asked. "No," she said firmly. "There's a small service, but Mom is staying in Mesa. She didn't even ask me to come. I think she knows." "Yeah," I said. "She knows." We didn't talk about him for the rest of the night. We talked about her job, about Sarah's garden, and about the fact that I was thinking of hiring a second tutor because our wait list was already growing. A week later, a small, heavy box arrived at my house. It was from the estate attorney. No note, no explanation, just a box. Inside was my father's old drafting kit, the one he used as a civil engineer. The brass compasses were polished, the rulers perfectly straight. It was the tool he had used to build bridges and roads, the things that connected people. It was a cruel irony, considering he spent his personal life blowing those same bridges up. I took the kit down to the basement. I didn't throw it away. I didn't smash it. I put it on a shelf next to my own tools. It was just an object. It couldn't hurt me anymore, and it couldn't fix what was gone. It was just a reminder of a man who knew how to build everything except a relationship with his own son. Life moved forward. The bridge became a staple of the community. I started seeing kids who had come in crying now walking in with their heads held high, carrying books they weren't afraid of anymore. One Saturday, Sarah and I were walking through the park. I saw a family, a mom, a dad, and a young girl getting into a car. The dad was laughing, ruffling the girl's hair as he buckled her in. For a second, I felt that old, sharp hang of what if, but then Sarah took my hand. "You're thinking about it again," she said softly. "Just for a second," I admitted. "Look at where we are, Ethan. Look at what you built." I looked around. I saw the town I chose, the life I earned, and the woman who stayed. I thought of Chloe, who was finally breathing again. I thought of the kids at the center who were learning that their brains weren't a curse, just a different kind of map. My parents dropped me off at a rest stop 18 years ago because they thought I was a dead end. They were wrong. I wasn't a dead end. I was just a detour. And sometimes, the detour takes you to a much better destination than the main road ever could. I'm Ethan. I'm a builder. And for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for anyone to come back for me. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The story is finally finished, and it's a good one. 5 years after the doors of the bridge opened, I stood on the sidewalk watching a crew install a new sign. We had expanded into the building next door. What started as a small project fueled by settlement money and spite had turned into a regional hub for neurodivergent kids. I wasn't the guy hiding under the picnic table anymore. I was the guy people called when they didn't know how to help their children. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Chloe. "Check your email. It's finally done." I walked into my office and opened my laptop. The email was from the estate lawyer in Arizona. My mother had passed away in her sleep 2 weeks prior. Because she had no assets left and we had already settled the trust fund theft years ago, there was nothing left to fight over. The email was simply a formal notice that the probate was closed. The last legal tie to Phoenix was severed. There were no tears, just a profound sense of space, as if a low-frequency hum that had been playing in the background of my entire life had finally cut to silence. A knock came at my door. It was Leo, the boy who had been clinging to his mother's leg on our opening day. He was 13 now, tall and gangly, carrying a thick fantasy novel under his arm. "Hey, Ethan," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I finished it. The whole series." "Every word?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Every word, even the appendix with the fake Elvish language." He grinned, a confident, sharp expression. "I'm thinking about writing my own. My teacher said my world building is extraordinary." "She's right, Leo. You always did see the patterns other people missed." After he left, I sat in the quiet of my office. I thought about my mother. I thought about the woman who had watched a car pull away from a 13-year-old boy and felt nothing but relief. I realized then that I didn't need her to be sorry. I didn't even need her to understand. Her role in my story was over the moment I decided that her definition of me was wrong. That evening, I drove home to find a moving van in Chloe's driveway 2 blocks away. She wasn't leaving. She was moving into a bigger place with a guy she'd been seeing for a year, a soft-spoken librarian who thought her fierce protectiveness was her best quality. I helped them carry a heavy oak dresser up the stairs. "You okay?" Chloe asked, handing me a bottled water when we finished. "I know the email came today. I'm better than okay," I said, looking out her new bedroom window at the mountains. I was thinking about that $40. The reality check Dad wanted to give me. Chloe leaned against the wall. "What about it?" I realized he was right, in a twisted way, I said. "It times was times a reality check. It taught me that the people who are supposed to love you might not. But it also taught me that the rest of the world is full of people like Aunt Renee and Gerald and Sarah, people who will see you if you just keep your eyes open." I pulled a $40 bill out of my wallet. It was a crisp, new note. I walked over to her bookshelf and tucked it behind a photo of us at my wedding. "A backup?" she joked. "No," I said. "A souvenir from a life we don't live anymore." That night, Sarah and I sat on our back porch. The Colorado air was crisp, signaling the start of another autumn. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the future, about the new branch of the bridge we were planning to open in Denver, and about the fact that we were finally ready to start a family of our own. I used to be afraid of having kids. I was terrified that the broken parts of my DNA would carry over, that I'd somehow inherit my father's coldness or my mother's shame. But as I sat there, holding Sarah's hand, I realized that I had already broken the cycle. I had built a world where words mattered, where mistakes were just data points, and where no one was ever left behind at a rest stop. I'm Ethan. I'm a man who was once abandoned and is now deeply rooted. I'm a man who stopped looking for a map and started drawing his own. The boy under the table didn't just find his way home. He built a home where the doors are never locked, the lights are always on, and the story belongs entirely to him. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind and the trees. For the first time in 32 years, there was nothing left to say.